Robert Redford, the golden face of American cinema, the heartthrob who defined an entire generation. To the world, he was perfect, handsome, brilliant, untouchable. But behind that effortless charm and dazzling smile was a man hiding a secret so painful even his closest friends never saw the truth. When his wife finally spoke out, the revelation shattered everything fans thought they knew about him. And the way he left this world was nothing short of heartbreaking. Redford's life seemed like a dream, fame, wealth, and a career filled with unforgettable films like Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid and The Sting. He built an empire of success, but quietly, he was fighting battles no camera ever captured. The pressure of perfection, the weight of family tragedy, and a haunting secret that would follow him to his final days. When his wife, Sybil Sagars, finally broke her silence, the truth she revealed left fans in disbelief. It wasn't a scandal. It was something far deeper, far more human. A story of love, loss, and guilt that had been buried for decades. And when Redford's health began to fail, that hidden pain came flooding back in the most tragic way imaginable. As the details of his private struggle surfaced, it became clear that behind the Hollywood legend was a man carrying a wound that never healed, a wound that may have defined the quiet, heartbreaking way he said goodbye to the world. Robert Redford was never just another movie star. He was an idea. The ruggedly handsome, intelligent hero who could play both the rebel and the romantic with effortless grace. But the man behind the legend was far more complex than the roles he played. Beneath his calm smile was a lifetime of pain that even Hollywood couldn't script. And the secret his wife eventually revealed wasn't about fame or betrayal. It was about the kind of heartbreak that can quietly destroy a man from the inside. Born in 1936 in Santa Monica, California, Redford grew up in a modest working-class family. His father was strict, his mother gentle and supportive. But tragedy struck early. When Robert was just a young man, his mother died unexpectedly from a medical complication, a loss that left a hole in his heart that never truly healed. Friends later said that Redford rarely spoke about her, but her death marked him forever. He carried that grief silently, burying it beneath his pursuit of success. As his fame grew, Robert Redford became the face of a new kind of Hollywood masculinity, cool, confident, but thoughtful. Films like The Great Gatsby and All the President's Men made him a symbol of both charm and conscience. Yet even as he conquered the world, he couldn't escape the private storms gathering inside his home. In 1958, he married Lola Van Wagenen, a historian and activist. Together they built what seemed like a picture-perfect family, raising 4 children. But behind that image of domestic bliss was an unspoken sorrow, one that would change Robert's life forever. Their first child, Scott, died suddenly from sudden infant death syndrome at just 1 to 2 months old. The loss shattered him. Those close to Redford say he never recovered. He rarely talked about his son publicly, but his pain seeped into his work, giving depth to his performances and a quiet melancholy to his smile. For decades, Redford kept his grief locked away. He poured himself into his art, his environmental activism, and his Sundance Institute, always staying busy enough to avoid confronting his pain. But that grief lingered like a shadow. Even in interviews, when asked about family, there was a momentary flicker in his eyes, a glimpse of the heartbreak he tried so hard to hide. Years later, after his divorce from Lola, Redford found love again with Sybil Sagars, a German artist. Their relationship was deeply spiritual, built on mutual respect and creativity. But Sybil quickly realized that her husband was haunted by something unspoken. He would wake at night, lost in thought, staring into the dark. When she asked, he would simply say, "Some memories don't fade, they just grow quieter." What she eventually discovered, and later revealed after his death, was that Robert had lived his entire life with an overwhelming sense of guilt. He blamed himself for his infant son's death, convinced that his long work hours and absence had somehow contributed to the tragedy. No one had ever told him it was his fault, yet the perfectionist in him carried that burden anyway. He believed he should have been there, that he should have protected his child. It was that guilt, Sybil confessed, that shaped much of Robert's later years. His relentless drive for purpose, his desire to create something lasting, his passion for protecting the planet. It all stemmed from a need to make peace with that loss. He wasn't chasing fame anymore. He was chasing forgiveness. And as time began to catch up with him, that buried grief started to surface once more, leading to the heartbreaking final years of a man who seemed to have it all but had never truly healed inside. As the years passed, Robert Redford's public image remained spotless. He was admired not only for his acting but for his humility, his intelligence, and his refusal to be consumed by Hollywood's excess. Yet behind that composed demeanor, the weight of his buried sorrow continued to shape every decision he made. Friends say that Redford often withdrew into silence, not out of arrogance but reflection. He was a man forever wrestling with ghosts from his past. When his wife Sibylle later spoke about his private nature, she described him as a gentle storm, quiet on the surface, but with endless emotion beneath. She said that he rarely spoke of his pain, but she could feel it in the pauses between his words, in the way he lingered on old photographs, in the distant expression that sometimes overtook him after long days of work. Redford had lost not only his mother and his infant son, but also faced a lifetime of other heartbreaks, including the death of 2 close friends and collaborators. He was a man surrounded by beauty yet constantly touched by tragedy. That emotional duality became the core of who he was, the reason audiences connected so deeply with his performances. Every expression, every quiet look in his films seemed to carry a story untold. By the late 2010s, Redford had begun to slow down. He had announced his retirement from acting, saying he wanted to spend more time painting, writing, and enjoying a peaceful life with Sibylle. To outsiders, it seemed like the perfect ending to a remarkable career. But privately, his health was declining. Though the details were kept quiet, those close to the couple knew he was battling a long and painful illness, one that left him weaker with each passing year. During those final years, Sibylle became his greatest source of comfort. She encouraged him to speak about his regrets, to unburden himself of the guilt that had haunted him for decades. And slowly, Redford began to open up. For the first time, he allowed himself to talk about his son, his mother, and the heavy price of fame. He admitted that behind the awards and success, he'd spent much of his life trying to prove to himself that he deserved happiness, something he'd never truly believed. In one of their final private conversations, Sibylle said he confessed something that left her in tears. "I've spent a lifetime telling stories," he said softly, "but I never told my own, because it hurts too much." That was the truth she would later reveal. Not a scandal, not a hidden affair, but the heartbreaking confession of a man who had quietly carried grief for over half a century. When Sibylle eventually shared his secret publicly, it wasn't to expose him, it was to honor him. She wanted the world to know that behind the legend was a deeply human man who had loved deeply, lost deeply, and still managed to live with grace. Her words struck a chord with millions. Fans flooded social media with tributes, realizing that Robert Redford's greatest performance was not on screen, but in the way he carried his pain with quiet dignity. As his illness worsened, Robert spent most of his time at his home in Utah, surrounded by nature, the mountains, and the stillness he had always craved. He painted, wrote in his journals, and watched the sunset with Sibylle by his side. Those who visited said that even in frailty, his eyes still carried that unmistakable warmth, the same warmth that once lit up cinema screens across the world. But what few realized then was that those sunsets were also goodbyes. Each day, Robert was slowly letting go of guilt, of regret, of the life he'd once tried so hard to perfect. And in that quiet surrender, he finally began to find peace. As Robert Redford's life unfolded, the private struggles behind his polished exterior became increasingly apparent. Though he projected the image of a calm and composed man, those closest to him knew that beneath the surface lay a storm of pain, guilt, and longing. By the time he reached his 70s, he had lived through enough tragedy to break anyone's spirit. But Redford carried it all with the quiet resilience that defined him. Yet the most shocking revelation came later in life, one that even his fans never imagined existed. In private, Redford often spoke of regret. He once admitted that fame, while rewarding, came at a cost far greater than he was prepared to pay. His first marriage to Lola van Wagenen, though filled with love, was overshadowed by grief and emotional distance. The loss of their infant son, Scott, haunted them both for decades. Redford blamed himself, even though no one else did. "I should have been there," he once confessed to a close friend. It was a wound that never healed, and it became the silent shadow behind his eyes. Even in his most successful years, then came the passing of his second son, James Redford, in 2020, a filmmaker who inherited his father's artistic spirit but also his private battle with illness. When James died after a long struggle with liver disease, Robert was devastated. Those who saw him afterward described him as a man completely undone. Though he remained composed in public, insiders revealed that Redford's grief was overwhelming. He withdrew from public life soon after, quietly announcing his retirement from acting and directing. But the emotional blow wasn't just about losing his son. It was about confronting a secret he had long tried to keep buried. As his wife and family revealed later, Redford had lived for years with an unspoken fear that his fame had cursed the people he loved. He believed his career's intensity had distanced him from his family, and that the spotlight, while illuminating his art, had darkened his home life. This belief weighed heavily on him, shaping his later years into a period of reflection and sorrow. His wife, Sibylle Sagars, spoke candidly after his passing about the deep emotional scars he carried. She said Robert was haunted by things he never said aloud, and that he often questioned whether he had been a good father or even a good man. To the world, he was a legend. To himself, he was a man still trying to make peace with the ghosts of his past. Sibylle revealed that Robert often woke up in the middle of the night, lost in memories, his son's laughter, the sounds of the mountains, the moments he could never reclaim. In one of his final interviews, Redford confessed, "You spend your life running from pain until one day you stop running and it catches you." Those words, now chilling in retrospect, offered a glimpse into his weary soul. They hinted that he knew his time was coming to an end, and that he wanted to face it without pretense or fear. When his health began to deteriorate, Sibylle stayed by his side every moment. She later shared that Robert didn't want pity, only silence, peace, and the comfort of nature. His final days were spent at his beloved ranch in Utah, surrounded by the mountains he adored. As he looked out at the horizon one last time, Sibylle said he whispered, "This is where I started, and this is where I end." The revelation of his inner torment and his unwavering humility left fans heartbroken. For decades, Robert Redford had embodied everything Hollywood admired: grace, intelligence, charm, and integrity. But the truth his wife revealed after his death painted a far more human picture. A man who carried unimaginable pain, yet continued to live, love, and create until his final breath. It was this honesty, this raw, unfiltered truth, that made Robert Redford more than a movie star. It made him real, and as fans mourned him, they realized that the greatest story he ever told wasn't on film. It was the silent, beautiful tragedy of his own life. After Robert Redford's passing, the world paused to remember one of the last true giants of Hollywood's golden era. Tributes poured in from across the globe, actors, directors, and admirers whose lives had been touched by his work and his presence. Yet among all the heartfelt messages, one statement from his wife, Sibylle Sagars, stood out above the rest. She broke her silence with words that revealed the secret Redford had guarded for decades, a truth that left fans in tears. Sibylle revealed that Robert had spent his final years reflecting on the cost of the life he'd built. Behind the fame, awards, and success was a man who felt an unshakable loneliness. He had always believed in art as truth, but his own truth was often buried beneath layers of pain. He feared being remembered only as a movie star, and not as a father, husband, or man who had simply tried to do good in the world. He didn't want to be worshipped, Sibylle said softly. He wanted to be understood. The couple's final years together were quiet and deeply spiritual. Away from the cameras, they devoted themselves to environmental work, meditation, and art. Sibyl said Robert often spoke about finding peace through the natural world, the same world that had inspired so much of his life's work. He believed nature was the only thing that never lied, she explained. It gave him the peace he couldn't find anywhere else. As his health declined, Redford made one final request. He didn't want a lavish funeral or media attention. He wanted his ashes scattered on his ranch, under the same sky where he had once dreamed as a young man. "Let me go quietly," he told Sibyl. "I've said all I needed to say." But what his wife revealed afterward shook the world. She disclosed that in his final days, Robert had written a series of letters, handwritten messages addressed to each of his children and close friends. In them, he spoke honestly about his regrets, his mistakes, and the lessons he'd learned about love and forgiveness. He admitted that for many years he had been consumed by ambition, unable to balance success with the tenderness of family life. But in his final words, he wrote something that touched everyone who heard it. "If you ever think I was strong, know that my strength came from the pain I never showed." Those letters became a lasting reminder of who Robert Redford truly was. Not the perfect icon the world imagined, but a man who felt deeply, who struggled, who loved fiercely despite his fears. Sibyl revealed that on his final morning, Redford asked her to play soft music as the sunrise touched the mountains. She said his face, once burdened by years of silent sorrow, looked peaceful, almost relieved. "He smiled," she said. "It was faint, but it was real. I think he finally let go." When the news of his death broke, millions grieved, as though they had lost a member of their own family. Fellow actors called him the soul of American cinema. Directors praised his artistic integrity. But fans saw something even more profound, a man whose humanity shone brighter than his fame. Sibyl's final revelation came during a private gathering, where she shared one last message from Robert's journal. "I've lived a life full of beauty and mistakes. If I've left anything behind, I hope it's the truth that love and loss are not opposites. They are one and the same." Those words brought many to tears. They captured the essence of a man who had lived through both triumph and tragedy, yet never lost his sense of grace. Robert Redford's legacy wasn't just about his legendary films. It was about his ability to live honestly, to love deeply, and to face his pain with dignity. As the sun set over the Utah mountains, the place he called home, it felt as though the world itself bowed in silence. Robert Redford's story ended not with applause, but with peace. And for those who loved him, his family, his friends, and the millions who admired him from afar, that peace was the most beautiful ending imaginable.